Thanks, Eddie. Lots to discuss tonight, so let's get busy and begin with Alberta's referendum debate. It's no longer theoretical. It is messy, divided, and spiraling into legal and political confusion. Prime Minister Carney says he's already started his campaign for Canada and cautioned Albertans to be careful when considering the question.
I've begun that, and part of the campaign is not a campaign, but it's actions. It's practicing cooperative federalism with Alberta, with Quebec, with all provinces and territories in the country, with Indigenous peoples as well. I will make the following observation, though, about the question, and this is an observation from experience. In these separation issues, it is often advanced that vote for this and it's a free option. Vote for this and we will strengthen our hand in a future negotiation. That is a very dangerous bluff. That is a very dangerous bluff. I saw firsthand what happened in the United Kingdom when the view was vote for this, it'll be soft, and then we'll negotiate, etc. And they ended up, and they're still 10 years later trying to undo what people didn't think they were voting for, but what they ended up having. So we have to be very careful about this. There's a very strong positive case for Canada, a strong Alberta in a united Canada. We're making it stronger, working together, and I look forward to making that case with many other Albertans and Canadians over the course of the next 150 days.
On the no to separation side is the group Forever Canadian, and joining us is the lead of the group, Thomas Lukaszuk. Has the Danielle Smith government lost control of this referendum process? Yes or no?
Gary and Eddie, thank you for having me. Yes, they appear to have lost control on two fronts. The Premier decided to be a proponent of a pro-separatism question, which makes her really the third Premier in the history of Canada to put forward a question to referendum on breaking up Canada. But the previous two Premiers in Quebec at least had the mandate to do it because they got elected as separatist Premiers leading separatist parties. So there is a little bit of a confusion with that. But as of today, there is also an internal conflict in the Premier's caucus and party because Premier, being the leader of a party, still insists that she's not a separatist and that she will be campaigning for unity, whereas members of her caucus and her party president are saying, not a chance. We will be campaigning and voting for separation. So now you have a party with two heads, a leader and a president saying exactly the opposite. So no wonder Albertans are confused. And on top of it, the question that the Premier put forward to Albertans has 37 words in it, and it has a part A and part B. So it's not a situation we ever wanted to be in.
So let's have a look at that question. As you say, 37 words. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada, or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada? That's tough to get through in one breath, reading it for sure.
Well, it is, and especially when you consider the fact that this is the 10th question. There are 9 other questions that the Premier is putting on that very same referendum. And this question basically is, let's have a referendum on whether we want to have a referendum. It would never pass the Clarity Act requirements. It's confusing. It's upsetting a lot of Albertans. So now you have a really strange situation, let's call it that way, because separatists are not happy with this question because they want to go straight to a binding constitutional referendum on separating from Canada. The vast majority of Albertans, 75% plus, who are forever Canadians, don't want to have a referendum in the first place. And First Nations are saying, wait a minute, you can't ask any question on separation until you consult with us. So Premier didn't seem to have made anybody happy, and now it appears her party is divided as well.
Over to you, Eddie.
Thomas, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Eddie. Good to see you.
Question for you. Did the UCP hijack your Forever Canadian movement for political gain.
Well, they tried because Premier found herself in a very difficult political position. You know, she for the last year she really she paved the way for separatists to get their question on the ballot, and their question would have been a compelling question, binding the Premier to have a constitutional referendum. So the Premier really was paving the way for them to compel her to have that question, but their question got stopped by the courts. So she had no other choice. So she turned to our question, and but couldn't put our question forward because separatists would have a problem with that as well. So that's why she posed her own third question. But now she claims that everybody supports her, both separatists and us. But separatists are coming out, and we are coming out saying, no, none of us actually supports you in posing your own very confusing questions. So, you know, the Premier tried to dance with everybody at the same time. But what it really is about is Premier trying to stay in power. Because even though only about 25% of Albertans would consider separatism, in her United Conservative Party, more than 50% of members are separatists, and they are committed separatists. So they want her to have a solid, binding, pro-separatism question on the ballot.
Do you think that Albertans are being given a clear choice or more of an emotional one here?
Well, it's a divisive choice. You know, we're now in a situation in Alberta where literally neighbors don't talk to neighbors, and we look at each other with suspicion. If you have an Alberta flag in your yard, we assume you're a separatist. If you're flying a maple leaf, we assume you're a federalist. So the social cohesion is gone. You know, a neighbor of mine on Mother's Day just a few weeks ago sent me a message, said my mother will never forget this Mother's Day because all the siblings got in a fight and stood up and left the dinner table. So this is how intense and how emotionally charged this issue is in Alberta. But also we are already starting to see economic repercussions that are coming out of this. The chambers of commerce, mayors of major cities already are saying that this is impacting business. Ms. Nancy Southern, who is the owner and CEO of ATCO, which is one of Alberta's largest, most diversified oil and gas companies, she already is saying that she's thinking twice about investing in Alberta, even though she is from Alberta. So this is already having an economic impact as well.
Wow. And earlier on, you had brought up the Quebec separatist movement in the past, and of course, we have Mr. Plamondon pushing that during a potential first mandate. And it's all about accuracy of communication, what the message is. So, question for you: do you think Albertans are being misled about what separation would really cost them?
By all means. Then, you know, there was a case in Alberta in December where Elections Alberta put the separatist question to the Court of King's Bench for a reference decision. And Justice Feasby, who is a constitutional expert, said that in a Western democracy, you cannot put forward to electors a referendum question with the electors, with voters not knowing what the consequence of their vote would be. And we saw what happens when you don't explain what the consequences are in Brexit, as Prime Minister mentioned, in the United Kingdom. You know, people had no idea what the outcome would be if they separate from European Union. And in Alberta, most people have no idea what it would actually mean to separate from Canada. You know, there are these assumptions that we would still get to keep Canadian citizenship, but who said so? Or that we will be continuing to use Canadian currency, but who said so? Farmers in Alberta assume that the morning after they will still throw their grain onto a CP or CN train and ship it to Vancouver, but who said so? So you know, there's a lot of assumptions, and often separatists are leading Albertans to believe that life will be exactly the same, other than you will no longer be paying any taxes to federal government. And we know that that is not the case. And I often remind Albertans, I'm saying that this is much like a divorce. Once you're divorced, you don't show up in the evening and say, "What's for dinner, honey?" That is over. So there's a lot of explaining, a lot of factual explanations that need to be shared with Albertans. But unfortunately, the question that the premier is posing is muddying up the waters. And now Albertans are wondering whether we should be voting on whether we should be voting. It's not making the situation any better from both social cohesion perspective, but also from an economic investment climate.
Mhm.
Now, a recent Court of King's Bench ruling stated separation cannot proceed without approval from the First Nations. So, are the politicians really ignoring this reality?
Well, very much so. And you saw the Premier's conference that was hosted in Alberta and Kananaskis by Premier Danielle Smith and her the disagreement in a public forum with the Premier of Manitoba. She believes that the consultation needs to be redefined by courts. Well, it already has been redefined by courts. And there are some Albertans who are saying, well, how come Quebec gets to have a referenda and we don't? Why do we have to consult with First Nations and Quebec didn't have to? Well, when Quebec held its referenda, there were no rulings on the requirement of consultation with First Nations. Now there are, and they're binding across Canada. So if Quebec was to have a referendum in the near future, you will be going in Quebec through the same process. You will have to consult with First Nations first. And Justice Feasby, in the case of December of the Court of King's Bench, went even further. And he said not only First Nations, but all voters should be consulted because voters must understand what the consequence of their vote is.
And Thomas, we are where we are today. How do you de-escalate this practically?
Well, we're trying to do this as Forever Canadian. I am traveling the entire province with the Unity bus. We're having a positive conversation. We are not aiming at converting people or changing their minds because most Albertans' minds have already been made up. I respect the separatists. Some separatists bring forward some valid issues. So our Forever Canadian campaign is not a status quo campaign, but it is a campaign that messages to them, look, we hear you. And it appears that actually Prime Minister Carney also heard you. Alberta is doing much better with Ottawa right now, better than it ever has during Harper or Trudeau times. Alberta is actually extracting some really good concessions from Ottawa. Why would you want to put a wrench in all that? Let's focus on further developing our relationship with Ottawa and other provinces, but let's not create bigger problems because separation would definitely create bigger problems than what we have right now. So that respectful conversation with separatists seems to be resonating, and that's what I will be doing until October 19, the referendum day.
Mm-hmm.
It seems, though, that the separatists are fighting an uphill battle because poll after poll, including a couple just released earlier this week, indicate that the majority of Albertans are not in favor of separating from Canada.
That is correct.
When are they going to take no for an answer?
Well, let me defend them a little. I do understand them. I don't agree with them, but I do understand them because, first of all, they were sold a lot of mistruths. How life would be grand in Alberta if we were to be this independent country, and some very questionable economists have drafted reports for them showing them that they will be simply flush with cash if we were separate. But they also feel that they have President Trump behind them right now because they're holding meetings with the U.S. administration. They feel that they have Premier Danielle Smith behind them. So they felt that their stars have aligned. And now that the Premier put this strange question on a ballot, they feel cheated. They expected a binding referendum question, and she didn't give him that. So now that is why the UCP party is literally split half and half. As wrong as they were in their assumptions of what this Alberta would look like after separation, you have to give them credit. They were very passionate. They were collecting their own signatures on their petition, and here they are. They don't get to put their question forward. The premier who seem to be backing them for the whole year and changing rules in their favor, overriding court decisions in their favor, all of a sudden is not giving them what they want. So they feel betrayed, and that further fuels their anger without a doubt.
What do you think the realistic shelf life of Danielle Smith's term as Premier and leader of the UCP is? Because it seems that some of what I'm beginning to hear in various discussions coming from the West would indicate that perhaps it's moving in a direction that some of the very strong separatists within the party are now getting ready to toss her out.
That's right. So the premier's biggest opposition is within her own party and caucus, not the official opposition in the legislature. I don't think she's threatened by the NDP and Mr. Naheed Nenshi in particular at this point in time, but her opposition is in her caucus because she does have declared separatists. On the day when the premier came out and said that she and her entire caucus will be campaigning for unity, I was attending a parade for the Rainmakers Rodeo in St. Albert, just outside of Edmonton, and her MLAs were riding on a pickup truck with separatists waving Alberta flags. So she has a massive issue in caucus. Her president of her party is opposing her, and more than 50% of her party membership are opposing her. So their constitution is such in the United Conservative Party that if they get 20-some constituency associations asking for a emergency annual general meeting, they can call one this fall and simply vote her out of leadership, much the same as they did with Jason Kenney. This is a party. This is a party that was created by Jason Kenney, and as much as I appreciate Jason right now working on behalf of unity and doing his own bit to support Canadian unity, the problem really begun with him trying to form government, hell or high water, and merging the the Progressive Conservative Party with then the Wild Rose Party led by Danielle Smith. And he formed this political Frankenstein that is internally divided because Progressive Conservative Party in Alberta was a rather center-right party, whereas Wild Rose was a far-right party with some radicalized elements. And Kenney thought that he can bring them together, win an election, and then get rid of them after. But I always say, once you sleep with dogs, you get fleas, and it's difficult to get rid of them. And he couldn't get rid of them; they got rid of him. And now the United Conservative Party is literally Wild Rose Party 2.0. There's very little DNA of the old Progressive Conservative Party left in that movement. So they will do with Danielle Smith what they did with Jason Kenney. No one seems to be radical enough for them to be their leader. And now they have a leader who writes letters to Pentagon about chemtrails, and she is an anti-vaxxer, and she's trying to give them what they want, but it's still not good enough.
Right.
So what is the takeaway?
Well, the takeaway is for all politicians. Be true to yourself. Have a moral compass. Actually believe in something and stick to it. If you try to be a populist and if you try to please everyone all the time and tell people what they want to hear, whether you actually believe in it or not, you find yourself in this situation. One of the political analysts, conservative political analysts in Alberta, Mr. Bosenkohl, accurately said, Danielle Smith is neither separatist nor a federalist. She's worse. She's an opportunist. And I agree with that assessment. I maybe less kindly so, and it wasn't meant to be an insult, but I consider Danielle Smith to be a little bit of a political magpie. She'll pick up any shiny object as long as it gets her to the next day. And she's been trying to please all these fringe groups within her party, but she can't please them all. and now they turn their backs on her, and she seems to be alone. And the problem I think she has also is in her premier's office. There are aspiring premiers in her office who are gladly adding fuel into that fire and won't be sad seeing her go.
Mhm.
All right, Thomas, thank you for taking time out to speak with us this evening. Really appreciate the update. And it's going
Thank
to
you
be a
for
busy
having me.
summer for you.
Yes, but you know, in a way, it's energizing. Albertans are proud Canadians, and it's a test of our will, but we will prevail. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Thomas. Thomas Lukaszuk is the leader of Forever Canadian, the group fighting to keep Alberta in Canada. All right, let's move along. And just somebody who's been quite busy commenting this past week just popped up, Eddie, and suggested that I can't believe you're blocking my comments. I didn't block any comments.
No, I didn't do anything from here either.
No. So Wayne here, we are innocent, not guilty as charged. So if you have a comment, pop it in and we'll pop it up if it's civil. Just keep that in mind. That's the only thing I request, is that we keep it civil. Eddie, the polls are showing that Albertans, the vast majority of Albertans, don't want anything to do with separating from Canada. But this is a very vocal minority, it seems, that is pushing forward with this idea. And they just keep rolling along. However, it seems too that they're beginning to really worry, because one individual in particular, a former talk show host in Calgary, who now does a daily YouTube piece, the other day posted his daily offering. I haven't had a chance to listen to it, watch it yet, but the thumbnail to me said it all, because it was a thumbnail saying, we need help, and we need help from everywhere. So that tells me that they are feeling the fact that not only do the majority of Albertans surveyed say they're not interested, but also the question, the way it's worded, 37 words of political doublespeak, really, when you get right down to it, they find the question confusing. And one polling firm asked, okay, if the question read, do you want to stay in Canada, yes or no? And they responded, that's the sort of question that they're looking for. Yeah. But there are so many other issues that are involved with it, because it's no longer politics. It is a constitutional risk in the fact that you've got these people running around and they're pushing this separation. And even when they talk about it in the way they form a question about how they feel that the question should be formed, it's as the Prime Minister said, be careful, because the question you may interpret the question one way, but the actual results of the question, if you favor it, are entirely different. And at that point, you have no control. You're in for, what's the old saying? You're in for a penny, you're in for a pound kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, and again, Thomas brought up some good points in the fact that there's nothing solid other than this group, or one of the groups, has traveled to to Washington on a number of occasions, feel that they have the backing of the U.S. administration, but there's been nothing beyond that. There's been no hard numbers that I'm aware of put to what it's going to cost to do this. There have been no, as Thomas raised, do we keep Canadian currency? Well, has anyone asked? or who said we could, and on it goes. Passports, you name it, everything else. The same as in Quebec.
And that's just scratching the surface.
Exactly. Now, we do know in Quebec with the PQ anyway that, in fact, they're pushing ahead with full nationhood with their own currency and so on. So they're at least more definitive in how this is going than what the Albertans. The separatist group in Alberta just seems to sort of be willy-nilly and loose-knit, as Thomas was referring to. And I just want to point out something now. We did reach out to at least 2 of the groups involved, and in both cases, we've had no response. And it's not
you brought that up.
For lack of trying. We wanted to try and give the other side the opportunity. And I'll try one more time at some point between now and maybe the end of June, and see if they're willing to come on and talk with us. If not, oh well. You had your opportunity. We've fulfilled our obligations, and that's the way it'll be. I don't know, maybe they feel that we're not going to be friendly to them or something, but hey, we're based in Quebec. We talk separation every other day, for God's sakes.
We see it on the news every second day, right? For
Yeah,
me,
exactly.
Gary, which is why I asked Thomas. I mean, it's what frustrates me the most. Having lived through 2 referendums in Quebec in my adult lifetime, listening to some of the misinformation that has come from the Plamondon platform in terms of the benefits of Quebec becoming its own country. A lot of it is very misdirected and it's very diluted, and they just make assumptions that, because we want this is what we're going to have. Oh, by the way, we're going to have the Laurentian dollar. Well, it's not like all of a sudden you just print money and the money is going to be at par with what people were used to having Canadian currency, and they just assume all the price of retail pricing is still going to be the same. None of these consequences were communicated during the last referendum in '95. The platform put up by the Parti Québécois in Plamondon last year, I think it was fraught with, I'm not going to say lies, I would say more to the terms of inaccuracies and not the entire picture. And Thomas had mentioned a few on his side. He'd mentioned currency, he'd mentioned making the assumption business is going to be the same. And, it's no, who said that? Who said this and who said that? So my fear in Quebec is we are going to be facing this more and more as the year progresses. Gary, you know it as well as I do. And if towards the end of this year, if the Parti Québécois does win an election, they said within their first mandate, they are going to push the separatist question. Are we going to get the right information? Are the individuals who are going to be voting for separation going to be voting based on what's in it for Quebec and how is it going to make my life better? I really don't know. I would suspect no. So I kind of try to parallel my concerns for Albertans and, the folks within the separatist movement, and I really appreciated the fact that Thomas says he respects their views, but he doesn't accept them. He doesn't agree with them. Same thing from my side here. I live in a beautiful province of Quebec. I am an Anglo-Quebecer, bilingual, that's proud of my province. Yet we continuously have to deal with the separatist issue and the economical consequences that we've suffered ever since the last referendum in '95. We still haven't recovered from that here. And I'm really hopeful that the separatist movement in Alberta is accurately giving the population there the pros and the cons of separating from Alberta, Alberta separating from Canada. I'm sure there are cons, but from what I've seen on television, what I've seen online, what I've seen in the news media, I really haven't seen any risks communicated at all to the population of Alberta, which I think is the sad part in terms of, leading horses to water and expecting them to drink it. And they'll probably drink it. So, yeah, I'm worried for Albertans. Even though they're a minority, they're still they still can rattle a few cages out there, scare away potential investors, investment in the province because of uncertainty. And you know what? I guess they haven't learned from what happened here in Quebec.
And the other side of it is with the court ruling about you can't go anywhere anyhow until you sit down and negotiate with the First Nations and Indigenous people. It has all kinds of implications at that stage for Quebec, Indigenous sovereignty and federal authority all colliding. And as we touched upon last week, there's a bit of a difference between Quebec and Alberta in the fact that Alberta has all treaties that were numbered treaties that were signed, negotiated, and signed before Alberta became a province. So, whereas in Quebec, we have fewer numbered treaties, we do have some. We do have some regional agreements with First Nations, and then we have a couple of First Nations groups who, back in 1995, held their own referendum and voted overwhelmingly to stay in Canada, which that was the final nail in the coffin as far as the separation movement was concerned at that point in time. It was signed, sealed, and delivered. They weren't going anywhere. They were going to remain a part of Canada no matter what Quebec did. There are just so many moving parts in a lot of ways. Now, coming back to the clarity issue, the Prime Minister the other day came out before the cameras and said, essentially said that he had consulted with constitutional experts and the legal beagles. And the Clarity Act, Parliament will not debate this because under the Clarity Act, Parliament must debate the question and give approval. They will not be doing that with this particular question because it's a question asking if you want a question put on the ballot, on a separate ballot. So this question itself does not fall under the Clarity Act. If they manage to get approval with the majority of votes favoring this question to move to, yes, hold a referendum, a provincial referendum, then whatever the wording of that question would fall under the Clarity Act. It would have to pass the smell test in the House of Commons. So that's and it's a bit confusing, at least initially, but when you listen to the reasoning and think about it, it makes sense. There's nothing here. It's a question about a question. That's how Carney put it. And that's what it is. Here they're just asking, do you want us to move forward with this? And, Danielle Smith is playing both sides of the coin here, for sure. Trying to keep both sides happy. And now it's becoming very evident very quickly that she is now in a fight for her political life. It's as simple as that, because the party president, the UCP party president, came out and said that he wasn't overly impressed, and a lot of the people within the party members weren't overly impressed with her, going on about, I support remaining in Canada, I'm a federalist, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not buying into that. And so she, as so many of the pundits have said in the last 3 or 4 days, Danielle Smith has painted herself into a corner. And it's not going to be pretty as she tries to claw her way out. And as I said before, and we got the lowdown on the history as to how it all unfolded, but Jason Kenney was very quickly herded out as premier. He was sitting premier at the time as well, herded out because he fell out of line with what the back room wanted.
Right.
It's the sad part about it is Forever Canadian and Thomas are getting international attention now. This whole question is getting international attention. He's done 4 or 5 interviews with European broadcasting networks. So, and what does that do for the job that the federal government right now, in particular the Prime Minister, is trying to do to attract foreign investment?
Exactly.
You know, every time we go down this road, and I don't understand why people wanting to separate, why they don't get it. They're just, even if they feel that they have the majority behind them, in a lot of cases they don't, and it's even easier now to find out if they do because of modern polling methods. But the fact of the matter is, they don't look at the long-term consequences, what they're doing here. Especially when they're not organized, they really don't have any sort of concrete plans. Running down to the White House for one group and coming back and bragging about, we were talking about a line of credit. That's not doing you any favors, especially going to the White House, given the circumstances. Not doing you any favors at all. And now, when you've got international attention starting to kick in here on this question, that's not only going to affect Alberta, that's affecting the rest of the country as well.
When we as a country, and I don't care if it was the Liberals leading it or the Conservatives leading it, trying to get Canada not stop doing business with the United States, to basically cut our dependency on the United States by looking at investment opportunity elsewhere. It'll be impacted. I mean, right now it's Alberta. Gary, Quebec is going to be following very closely on those horrible coattails. And again, the question of political and economic stability is always on the forefront of every company and every country that decides to continue doing trade with us, and also companies looking at investing in our country. It's going to hamper it. Short term and long term. The consequences are long term, and that's just the way it is. And you can't ignore that. I mean, simply putting, any, I don't care what we've had people from Saskatchewan on the show that were speaking about looking at a separatist movement. Whoever separatists are in this country, the question that you have to ask yourself: if you had money, would you if you had money, would you invest in Eaton's, for example, when they started saying they were having problems with running a business? The Hudson Bay Corporation. If you knew that they were struggling economically, would you send them money? No. Nope. Why would you think other countries would want to invest in Quebec, Alberta, or whoever wants to separate when there's instability and you don't have control of your local economy? You're going to have very difficult time finding business investment in your province, and it makes me profoundly sad. It really does.
Now we know that Plamondon and other PQ reps back in September met with some of the separatist people in Alberta to discuss the whole situation. And I presume the Alberta folks were looking for some background and suggestions from the Quebec side. I'm sure that the impact of the 95 in particular referendum had on this city, Montreal, and the province in general, never mind the rest of the country, because economic prosperity slowed. I'm sure that that was not brought up. I would be very, very surprised. But you talk to people on the street about hearing in Montreal in particular, and when you mention the 95 referendum, one of the first things they start to talk about is what it did to this city, how it was a gut punch to the city, and the number of offices we lost, and the investment that we lost in this city, and how we tumbled from the largest city to the second largest city at Toronto's expense.
And quickly.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was underway. The mass exodus was underway in the time leading up to the referendum, and when they finally set a date and everything, and leading up to the vote, and shortly after, because there were still a lot of questions in the aftermath of that referendum, because it was so close.
Mm-hmm.
So people just look at a bit of history and see what you're dealing with. Democracy isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternative. And a country like Canada isn't perfect and never will be. And that's in some respects to our credit, because we're ready and willing to stand up and offer different ideas and put forth different positions and ready to defend them. But we also are a country that, has in the past been peaceful, and we will compromise and try and find what the best solution is for the greater good. And that's what we should be doing now. Frankly, trying to break away, I think, is kind of like the coward's move. And you're living in a fantasy world. Look around you now. Look at the politics of the world now, the situation of the world now. And where do you think you're going to fit in, and how do you think you're going to make out?
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that, Eddie. That's the way I see it. Now, you were here during the 95 referendum, and am I wrong in assuming and feeling the way I do about it?
Not at all. And I think at the end of the day, although by a slim majority, and that was more towards the end, where your sentiments were basically sentiments that were absorbed by a lot of people that potentially might have been voting yes. At the end of the day, they took a look at what this is going to do to them, what it's going to do to their province, maybe not necessarily to Canada, but what it's going to do to their province, and decided to vote no by a very, very slim margin. Personally, I think if the campaign went on another month, because I think the no movement was a little late to the party, especially Canada promoting unity in Quebec came a little late to the party. I think given another 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, that the vote count would not have been as close as it was. It would have been more on the no side. But you're absolutely right. As individuals who are looking at potentially stepping into some separatist movement in whatever province you're in, reflect, like you said, Gary, reflect. What does it actually put me in context of what's going on in the rest of the world? And leaving the country, is that going to benefit me, my family, and my province, or staying in the country is going to give me a better sense of security? So I think the way you put that, Gary, is bang on. Absolutely.
All right. So, Eddie, I guess it's time to wrap up discussion on this issue for now, but I'm sure we're going to be coming back to it very, very soon, because somewhere along the way, somebody's going to throw another snowball from the separatist side in Alberta. Plus, we're going to have to look at how this is all going down as far as the impact on the rest of the country as well. Yeah. So our takeaway is this. This is not a movement yet. It's a power struggle pretending to be one.